Alberto knows exactly what I think is the candidate experiment, and it's one to explain this impulsivity. There are going to have to be a series of neuroscientific experiments which yield novel behavioral predictions. This is really critical because what you're saying when you do that is, I can use the mapping and a study at the neuroscientific level to make a behavioral prediction that has never before been made by an economist, and that an economist would not have thought to make. That behavioral prediction has to be validated, and then the last piece to make this a home run is it has to undermine a major axiomatic theory.
That's important.
And suggest an alteration to that axiomatic theory. As Alberto knows, there are two groups in my lab working on experiments that have this flavor. They may or may not succeed. These are the experiments that are really going to, I think, make it impossible to look away. It's a question, as Alberto said, of defining what's in the utility function. That's the whole point. George Lowenstein, a noted economist and psychologist, once gave me this puzzle. You go off to one of your graduate students goes off to a conference at some remote city. She's engaged. And she meets some nice guy, and they go out to a bar. And she's sitting at the bar trying to decide whether or not to go back to the hotel room with this guy. And she does. And then she wakes up the next morning, she's completely distraught and miserable and crying. And so how do you explain that? Because that was an irrational act. And George has argued to us that that's because something emotional takes over control of her behavior, and the rational part of her. Now, as a biologist, here's my read on that. We evolved to maximize fitness. She is just doing exactly what she was designed by evolution to do. And
how come half of them may do and half of them may not do? Is evolution that...
No, so then I have to explain to you something from game theory called a mixed strategy equilibrium that requires unpredictability in behavior in order to maximize welfare of the agent. So there's a very good answer, but it would take a little while to work through.
I think so, but I'll take your word for it, because I don't think you have the answer. But I think the only way you can have that answer is if you have the patient in your office, and then you can draw the line that will explain to you why this person did what she did, and another person, very similar in many ways, did not do what she did.
So to me, that is a parallel, even an equivalent, perhaps, explanation to the game theoretic one.
No,
okay,
we can't do it forwards, only backwards.
Yes.
If the person comes in and says, I was so tempted, but I didn't.
We can't predict.
We can do it forward in the aggregate.
In the aggregate,
well, we can't predict.
And in mammalian models and in bird models of monogamous animals, you find this, what you just described.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And you find it in human societies, too. So that means that there's a biological possibility, a propensity, but it doesn't mean every single person would succumb without
this may be helpful. There's a very, very famous puzzle by the economist, physicist, everything elseist, John von Neumann. Sherlock Holmes is in Victoria Station in London, and he jumps on a train which is going to stop at Canterbury on its way to Dover. And he knows that Dr. Moriarty, his arch enemy, has got to the station just after the train is pulled out. So he's okay on the train. Moriarty has a gun, and he will kill Holmes if he can find him. So here's the decision Holmes has to make. If Holmes gets off at Canterbury, I left out one other fact. Moriarty's rich, which you're supposed to know, and he can charter a train. But he has to know where to stop. Because if Holmes gets off at Canterbury and he shoots to Dover, he'll catch Holmes at Dover. But the opposite is also true. So what is Holmes to do? If Holmes says, well, here's what's going to happen. Moriarty is going to think I'm going to Dover. So I'll get off at Canterbury. But of course, Moriarty is smart enough to know that, right? So he'll work through that same logic, and he will also go to Canterbury. By which logic, Holmes should, of course, then triple cross him and go to Dover, by which you get this idea. And so the solution, I'm simplifying a tiny bit from the way von Neumann presented it. Von Neumann argues what Holmes is actually supposed to do is flip a coin. That the safest thing he can do is flip a coin. There's a 50% chance he'll get out alive. And a lot of games have this quality, although they don't all require an even coin. It's often true that a weighted coin gives you a better yield. So as an evolutionary biologist, here's my answer. In the aggregate, 30% of the people should do this. This can be predicted by game theory. Now you ask a great question, which is, what is the psychological and mapping one step down neurobiological instantiation of that randomization process, or the social instantiation of that randomization process? I am deeply interested in that question. I think we want to be able to answer that at all levels. The reason I have spent the last 7 years trying to become an economist, and the 7 years before it trying to become a psychologist, is not because I believe neuroscience will subsume economics or psychology. In fact, if you read my papers or my book or any of the things I've written, what I hope you'll see is that all three of those levels coexist in good theories. And my interest is in no way to replace economics. If I was going to do that, I would not certainly have wasted the time to be considered an economist by my colleagues, to try and publish in economics journals. My goal is to understand this process of our behavior in as many different ways as possible, because it is my conviction that understanding it more ways is more powerful than understanding it less ways. When all is said and done, what you want is an explanation at every level and as many ties between those explanations as you can get. They'll be incomplete. The mappings won't be perfect. That will be the strongest explanation of human behavior. Walling off these disciplines, which is the alternative, strikes me as, ostrich head in the sand. My discipline's fine. Now, neurobiologists mostly believe that. Don't get me wrong. I came from a tradition where they said, when I wrote my first economics paper for neuroscientists, it was, Nature wrote back and said, are you out of your, mind? You want to write a utility function in a neuroscience paper? That is a waste of time. Neuroscientists understand choice completely, and we know exactly how to study it. And ties with economics are a waste of time. So, I feel so passionately about this because I spend so much time on it. I am not in any sense trying to replace economics or psychology. I am trying to unite them with neuroscience.